Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by MediaCom.
Hi, welcome to another edition of Capitol Preview. My name is Bill Peard. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Association. Our purpose of this show is to talk to our state leaders, both senators and House members, to talk about what is important to Iowans. Our guest today is Senator Pam Jochum, District 50 and the City of Dubuque.
That's correct.
Welcome,
Thank
Senator.
you.
It's good to see you this morning.
Good to be here. Thank you.
I'm just going to kind of jump right in. We got lots to talk about, and so I think the first thing that I kind of want to get from you is the Senate Republicans have introduced a bill that cut taxes by $1 billion in 2019. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, thanks for the question.
Yeah.
Actually, the bill is going to change the landscape of Iowa, I believe, for generations to come. Parts of the bill certainly we can agree with in terms of getting rid of federal deductibility and then lowering some of the tax rates. And of course, collecting some sales tax on internet sales that we believe the state is losing probably about $200 million a year just in that alone. And of course, that puts our Main Street businesses at a bit of a disadvantage, competitive disadvantage, when I can buy something online and not have to pay that sales tax. So I agree with those pieces of it. But here's the problem. We set out 4 different principles that we believed any new tax reform needed to fit within. And that was that the tax system needed to be more fair. And by that I mean that right now, the lowest income earners in Iowa pay a much higher percent of their income in taxes than the top income earners. So that means you need to get rid of the federal deductibility, which we are just one of 3 states that allows that to begin with, and it skews what we look like on paper. It makes us look like a high tax state when in fact we're like smack in the middle. We rank about 29th in overall taxes in our country. But the issue is that the bill that the Senate Republicans put out will actually put the tax on our lowest income earners at 5% and 5.25%. Under the old law, that same group of income earners were taxed at 0.36% to 2.43%. So that group of the lowest income earners are going to see their taxes on their net income almost double. Now those at the top are going to see their numbers ratchet down to about 6.3% when this is fully phased in. So in terms of fairness, no, I don't think that they put together tax brackets that were fair. In fact, the brackets that they put in place are pretty much a flat tax. It's 5%, 5.25%, 5.5%, 6%. In the past, we had, I believe it was 9 different brackets. So it's closer to now a flat tax. The second issue was that it needed to fit within our current budget. We are right now in the process of our 3rd mid-year budget reductions. So revenues are coming in higher than they were the previous year, but at a slower rate than what was originally projected. So if you have a new tax piece that goes into effect January 2019, this bill will pull another $300 million out of the budget that we are right now working on. And we're already struggling with dramatic cuts in higher education, public safety, health services, essential services that Iowans rely on. So that's very problematic. And I know when the Appropriations Chair, Senator Schneider, was asked, where's that $300 million going to come from? He did not have any details whatsoever. The third piece was to rein in the corporate tax credits. Not all tax credits are created the same, but there are certainly some that we have been able to identify that are not performing as originally intended. The taxpayer is not getting the return on investment that was promised. So some of them need to be examined more closely and reined in. And then finally, that tax system needs to be much more transparent. And if you want to talk transparency, this bill was written behind closed doors. And then it was dropped on our lap Wednesday morning. and it went into subcommittee Thursday morning and came out of the full committee Thursday afternoon, and we're hearing rumors at least that they're planning to debate it maybe on Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. So that gives the public absolutely no time for real input, and certainly doesn't give Democrats a lot of time for input as well. So yeah, it's going to make major changes in the landscape of our state. On one hand, we may see, for those in the lower income brackets, so I always like to say, it's probably going to be about the equivalent of a Happy Meal a week. But in exchange for that Happy Meal, if your kids are going to be going on to college, you're going to pay much more than that in increased tuitions and so on. So we really need to think through this and see what the real impact is. We've asked the Senate Republicans for their spreadsheet on their fiscal analysis of the bill, and we were told they didn't have it yet. We would see it before we debated the bill, but how do you craft a $1 billion tax reform bill without fiscal analysis and willing to share it with the public?
You bring up good points, Senator.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. I'm gonna switch gears here a little bit. We've talked about taxes a lot. The topic, but another thing that's in our country's conscience is the gun control, and the Second Amendment are at the top of the news again. So will you share a little of your thoughts with that?
So you would think that after Columbine and after Sandy Hook and now this one in Florida that we would have dealt with this issue much sooner. So it's really a sad day for our country, the level of gun violence we continue to see. First of all, probably good just to start out to say, what is the Second Amendment?
Right.
And it says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So let's just start with that basic premise of what the Second Amendment actually says, because usually the first part of that amendment is not talked about. It's just that last little piece.
Right.
And all those pieces come together to form that Second Amendment. So what I have always believed in is that we need common sense gun safety regulation. So that means that I sit here and say, really, we all need to have a weapon of war in our possession like an AR-15? Really? I don't think so. And I think Congress made a mistake by not extending that ban on assault weapons. I do believe, and I'm speaking for myself, not my caucus.
Sure.
So in terms of background checks, far more extensive. Right now, Iowa's law, at least in the purchase of a handgun, says that there needs to be a 3-day cooling off period to give law enforcement time to do that background check. And they call it a cooling off period back in the 70s when they redid Iowa's criminal code, so that if you had this disagreement with an employer or a spouse or a girlfriend and you were emotionally angry and distraught, not using your head well, that you couldn't just walk in, buy a gun, and go back to that place and start shooting. You could not pick that gun up for 3 more days to give you time to cool off. And certainly that is a good idea, and I think it should be applied across the board to all gun purchases. And I also believe we should be closing the loophole on gun shows and private sales as well. You know, we keep saying somehow that the Second Amendment should have absolutely no regulations, and yet many other of our constitutional rights, including the freedom of speech, has some restrictions. You cannot walk into a crowded movie house and yell fire.
Right.
If you want to cast your vote, which to me is the most fundamental right of our freedoms and liberties in our country, our ability to elect people to represent us. There are even restrictions on that. You have to be a certain age, you have to be a resident of that community for a certain length of time. When you register to vote, you have to show some kind of identification to prove that you are who you say you are. And now, of course, the Republicans changed that to even make it more onerous, starting in 2018, that not only did you have to show who you are when you register to vote, but now when you show up at the polling place, you're also going to have to prove that again. So all of our rights have had some restrictions placed on them throughout the years, and certainly this should not be exempt.
Very well said. I think I don't want to give my opinion, but obviously I think mental health is a lot deeper issue in our country than I think we realize.
Sure.
And I think so many things come from that mental health. So what do you think the progress has been made on the other side, the Republican
mental health side of
on the
it?
mental health side of it.
So this year, actually during this interim, we were very fortunate because stakeholders came together and met throughout the summer and fall. And by that I mean people from public health, human services, counselors, parents of children that have some kind of mental illness or disability. They all came together. I think it was 15 to 30 people. And they met as professionals and said, what should Iowa be doing differently in the world of mental health and disabilities? And they came up with a whole list of recommendations. And we have actually passed those recommendations out of our Human Resources Committee. It's Senate File 2252. And it calls for 6 access centers throughout the state. Those access centers would be included in what we call intensive residential service homes. And that would be providing services to about 120 Iowans statewide at any given time that are in crisis with a chronic or severe mental illness that is out of control at the time. The access centers within those residential facilities would provide more of an outpatient service to someone who doesn't need psychiatric inpatient hospital care, but certainly needs more services than what are being currently provided in their community. So it might mean some additional medication differences, changes in their meds, more counseling, more peer counseling, other help with other family members of that individual to be able to find those symptoms much more early and catch them. And of course, that family can help that individual as well in a much more meaningful way than what we are currently able to do. Probably the biggest problem that our state and nation have faced is the stigma of mental illness.
Absolutely.
And so because of that stigma that's been attached to it, people have been far more reluctant to reach out and seek help. And that's most unfortunate. If you have a lung disease or heart disease, we don't think anything of talking about it and getting the help. But if you have a disease of the brain, we treat it differently, and there's a stigma that really keeps people at bay on trying to deal with that issue. So the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that problem and take away the stigma. They are not bad people. They never were. Their brain just is not producing the same kind of chemicals that most of us are able to produce to keep our mood stabilized and not hear voices that aren't there, whatever the issue may be.
Well, Senator, I hate to say this, but we're out of time. It's been a great conversation.
Wow, thank you.
It goes fast. I
It
appreciate
did.
Senator Pam Jochum of Dubuque being with us this morning. You gave us some great insight on some important things that are being addressed up at the state capitol.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Bill.
Thank you very much. Tune in again for another episode of Capitol Preview. Thank you.